And Steve, tell us a little about the blend composition lesson you gave us during the visit. From the position of leaves, the disposal of the central vein of the tobacco, whatever. You talk about this during visit today.
Also comparing with the Cuban,
Yes.
how they do, they cut it.
It's like a job here.
Just resume.
Make a short presentation about.
Short presentation, exactly.
Okay. So today we took a factory tour at Hoyda, Nicaragua. And you guys have had the luxury of visiting multiple factories. And I think they give one of the best tours here.
Exactly.
They do a really nice history and a nice walkthrough.
Yeah.
And I think they do a very good job. One of the things you have to understand that when the people that run these factories are giving you tours, we never know what's interesting or not interesting to the people on the trip, right? Because for them, they do it all day long. And like you made a comment that you visited one factory and said, yep, this is where we make our cigars walk around, right?
Exactly.
So I was just trying to add a little tiny bit of color commentary when Juan was showing you the various components of a cigar and the tools that we use to make a cigar. So I was just trying to exhibit some little additional facts about the way that cigars are crafted. So when you get all this tobacco in front of me, which is just a mix of this and that. Let's see what we got here. Got some Seco right here. Seco, we got a little Viso, and we got a little Ligero. Okay, good. So they have the three different textures of leaves. And what I was trying to point out to the consumers, or the people on the tour, I should say, because it was a combination of retailers also, was that, in every single cigar handmade that you smoke, there is always these ribs that's in the cigar. You can see the rib right there. And a lot of times consumers will refer to these as stems, but we don't call that a stem, we call that a rib. The stem is the part that goes from the butt of the leaf to the stalk.
Okay.
And what ends up happening is we always do what we call frog stripping. That's where we tear out basically about half to a third of the bottom, depending on the particular tobacco and depending on how thick that rib is. So these ribs, stems, are actually present in every handmade cigar that you buy. If you take a handmade cigar and you just cut it open before you smoke it, you can tell how many long filler leaves are in it by just simply cutting these stems. Now the problem is, for literally decades, magazines, books, social media have all told consumers these are bad, okay? And you have to understand, you're being told this by people that don't actually make cigars, right? You're being told this by salespeople, you're being told this by marketing people. And once something gets said multiple times, for you to be the guy that said, no, that's wrong, well, you're just making an excuse because you're making shitty cigars. So it's kind of like going out on a limb to actually explain to consumers what is actually happening. But that's what I was trying to do with you guys today. And I was trying to point out that in every single cigar, you actually have this. And this part is really very critical to the blend. Not only does it have flavor, because it has a heavy concentration of oil in it, but also it's these ribs in the tobacco. Let me see if I can just strip one of these out of here. That ends up giving you the structural rebarb in the bunch that actually allows the ash to stay on the cigar, because the ash is actually being supported by this in the cigar. So this is actually a critical component of the construction. If this wasn't in the blend, not only would it not taste as good, but you would just end up with a hot, flaky mess. So this has to be there. But we end up frog stripping it because the way cigars are bunched, when you simply tube tobacco, you're taking the butt of the cigar and you're flipping it this way, and you're taking my hand in the wrong place, and you're flipping the tips back this way. The idea is for that stem rib not to be in contact with your mouth, because you don't want to feel it touching your tongue. So really it should stop right about where the band is, okay? So when you're frog stripping the tobacco and when the bonchero is making the cigar, he's taking that in consideration to make sure that that's further up, because if it's closer to the head, then it ends up hitting your tongue and it's really annoying. Now, I know an average consumer would say to you, yeah, I had a cigar, it was tight and it didn't smoke, and then I pulled that rib out and all of a sudden now the draw works. Yes, that's true because you've created an air channel in the cigar, but the truth was there's a problem with the bunch because it was supposed to smoke with it there, and all you've done is create an air channel. And oddly enough, when you pull that out, now even though you can get a draw, it won't taste right because that dramatically affects the flavor because you've taken those oils that are out of the cigar. Now, one of the reasons how this whole myth got created has to do with Cuban cigars. Cuban tobacco is much thinner in texture. So while they also leave the same ribs in, so you can feel in this piece of Seiko, I mean, you can see how much thinner this is. On theirs, those ribs are there, but they're so thin that it appears that they're not there. When you smoke a heavier cigar made with Nicaraguan tobacco, those are much thicker, much meatier. Okay, so it was one of the things, and that was also true with the Dominican cigars when they originally were made out of all Dominican tobaccos. That rib was much, much thinner. So it was a way that they could kind of disparage the cigars that were made in Honduras and Nicaragua. Say, oh, well, our cigars don't have stems and their cigars do have stems. Okay, but it was really, they both always did. It's just a difference in texture. And one of the other things that while we were talking about that I was mentioning was kind of a significant difference in the way Habanos are bunched compared to non-Cuban cigars. In addition to Cuban tobacco being thinner in texture, it's also typically much shorter.
Exactly.
So when they're making a bunch for a Cuban cigar, they do what we call a break. And they only do one break from the center point, and the center point ends up getting flipped back in the hand like this. So when you do that, what ends up happening is you end up having the middle part of the tobacco always at the foot, okay? And you end up having the tip of the tobacco back near the head. Now, have you ever heard the fact that have you ever noticed when you're smoking a Cuban cigar, how it gets sour when you get near the band?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a very common trait in Cuban cigars. The reason why is because on any piece of tobacco, regardless of what it is, the tips are always stronger than the butt of the cigar on the blade. The butt of the blade is a milder tobacco than the tip. Well, on Cuban tobaccos, the tip is sour. Okay, so that's why on a Cuban cigar, typically with Cuban cigars, they're not as nubbable. Does that make sense to you? Where you can just smoke it down really short and it's still really good. A lot of times with Cuban cigars, you get to about the band and it starts to, you know how they say it starts to turn. And what it is because you're now into smoking the tips. The reverse to that, because of the cigars that we make outside of Cuba with non-Cuban tobaccos, we have much larger tobaccos. And because we have those larger tobaccos, we don't do that break in the center. What we do is we do two separate breaks. We do a break at the butt, which then gets folded over this direction. And then we do a break at the head, which gets the foot, that gets flipped back this way. And when you do that break, what just happened was I just took the tips and I just put them at the foot of the cigar. And that's one of the reasons why so often when you smoke a Nicaraguan cigar, it's so strong right when you first light it, because what you're getting is you're getting the strongest part of the leaf. Now, as a manufacturer and as a blender, we can affect that. We don't have to just flip it and put it back there. We can take this tip and we can break it and we can put it in the back. We can take some of the bottom and we can move it to the front. And that's what we call positioning of tobaccos. Now, one of the differences though is because in a Nicaraguan cigar, when you tear it apart, you're gonna look at it and go, oh wow, there's all these short pieces of scrap tobacco in it because of these breaks and these positionings. That's actually a good thing. You expect to see that. Where in a Cuban cigar, because they're doing that break in half and you tear it apart, that ends up all being essentially looking like all one long leaf, even though it's two pieces. And this is also a reason why most Cuban cigars, the large sizes, the Churchills and the double Coronas, were always so rare because their tobaccos are so short that they didn't have the tobaccos to make the longer cigars. And that's why you always had so many Robustos and so many Coronas, because they didn't have the length of filler necessary to actually make as many Churchills and double Coronas. So I was just trying to demonstrate a little bit of technical detail of the differences between how Habanos are put together versus how Nicaraguan and other Central American cigars.
Uau! Uau! É só isso. E bom, temos aqui uma mini plateia hoje e eu queria saber de vocês. Vocês têm alguma pergunta para fazer para o nosso querido Steve aqui? Quem começa?
No. Mr. Saka, what do you think about the market around the world, in principle, and man, the market in Brazil? What do you hope? What do you think the future, the Barton, for example, in that market?
So you want an honest answer? Say you want an honest answer.
Okay.
You know what I know about Brazil? I know Rio de Janeiro, I know Carnival, and I know that girls have very big butts, okay? I know absolutely nothing about Brazil. Seriously. I mean, it's one of the things, and I had this conversation that, look, I don't sell cigars personally internationally. All the cigars, so as I have a relationship with Hoyt to manufacture some of my products, like Sobremesa and Sin Compromiso and others, they are my international distributor. And they're the ones that have familiarity with all of these other markets. And honestly, I'm completely clueless. And in fact, one of my comments was when I heard that, oh, we're going to sell Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust in Brazil, I'm like, huh? Why? I mean, who's ever heard of Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust? It's not Fuente, it's not Padron, it's not Oliva, it's not like some well-known brand. You know what I mean? So I found it rather peculiar and odd. But again, if you're willing to give us money, let's see what happens, right? So I don't have any sense of the Brazilian market. I don't have any sense of what the future is. I have no idea how many cigar smokers are in Brazil. I have no idea what the preferences are. Now, if you ask me about the American market, I know pretty much everything. Okay, I've been intimately involved for well over 30 years. But outside of America, I really am quite ignorant. What I do know is that good is good everywhere, right? So if something is right, I imagine that it's going to be right for most people in most places. Because separate of countries and separate of language barriers, we can all kind of agree this is a good scotch, this is a good wine. Now there's individual unique taste profiles. Like for example, there's certain markets, like in your case, Brazilian Matafina. Europeans love mass market cigars made with Brazilian Matafina, right? That's a very desirable taste profile for them. So that's something that's unique to that particular market that you know. But honestly, for me, Brazil is a bit of a black hole. So you actually need to tell me, do I have a future there? Is there any hope?
I think the Brazilian people like so much the Dumbarton cigars. Sobremesa, Brazilian people makes crazy about the cigar. Yes or no?
But why? What do you think that is?
Because the profile of the cigar is very interesting because the seven different tobaccos inside. Your name, Steve Saka, is a big, huge name in the industry.
How?
The big name in this.
But in Brazil.
Exactly.
My Spanish sucks. You know how bad my Portuguese is? I literally asked, how do you say hi in Portuguese today? I go, oh, I'm like, oh, no, duh. Right? Like,
Obrigado.
You have a bad face, but a good
Oh my god. Oh, it's very interesting now. Yeah, the people like so much your cigars in Brazil.
do you think
This
that
is
it's
true?
Do you think it's because the other thing I was going to say that I think kind of ties everything together is how much more flat the earth has become because of the internet and social media
Exactly.
and podcasts and interviews. So if you're somebody that's really interested in cigars, I mean, look, you can find my fat head talking about cigars and tobacco and all sorts of bullshit in a million different places. So do you think that that's part of it too, that a younger generation is just viewing that and it's getting translated to Portuguese or translated to Spanish, or they're learning English because they're following TikTok and YouTube and
Exactly.
Instagram? Yeah.
Exactly. I remember when recording the first interview, the people, wow, Steve Saka is on the house in Cigars 019. Yeah, Steve Saka is here. The people, oh my God, Steve is here. Because
It's really sad that everyone's more excited to see me than my mother. I mean, that's really depressing.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Let's go.